Blessings in Jesus' name. Amen. So in this video I'm going to be talking about the gospel, the salvation of God, very simply. And first of all, we have to start off with, what is the gospel? The gospel is the good news. Now, clearly I'm a Christian. But what does it mean to be a Christian? To be a Christian means to be a follower of Christ and Christ-like in your conduct. So that's what's meant by following Christ. It means that you're following his example when he walked on the earth, and therefore you're following him out of this world and to everlasting life. Now this world is passing away, and to understand the gospel or the good news, you have to have some fundamental knowledge. And a lot of people lack that knowledge in our day. And Jesus said, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." So if there's that lack of knowledge, another word for a lack of knowledge is ignorance. And ignorance is the very word defined by the lack of knowledge. That's what it means. So what I don't want on my hands is a neglect to inform other people of the good news and of the fundaments as to why it is the good news. Now, we were all born into the world having a sort of a sickness in us. And that sickness is the knowledge of evil. And so the knowledge of evil brings with it a law in your members, in your very body, in your very brain, in your being, in your soul. Brings to the members the law of sin. The law of sin lives in us. So as human beings we have a choice to make, the law of sin or the law of faith. If we choose the law of sin, we've chosen death. Because Jesus said the wages of sin is death. What he means is that when you sin, you bring upon yourself harmful paths and you set your feet upon them. And those harmful paths will lead you to destruction. It's like if you do something wise, you avoid harm. If you do something unwise, you find harm. It's that simple. Now, sin is unwise. But sin is not without its satisfaction. Because there are parts, we will call them bellies in your nature. And those bellies are urges and desires. They're hungers that have been created in us by having partaken of the knowledge of evil. And that knowledge of evil was first partaken of by Adam in the Garden of Eden. Now God created a tree, or placed the tree in the Garden of Eden. And he said to Adam and Eve, "Do not partake of the fruit of this tree, or you will surely die." And that tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, Adam and Eve knew good. All they knew was good, for they were pure. But when you know good and evil, now you have a conscience to differentiate between what is good and what is evil, because evil is present. Whereas prior to partaking of the tree of knowledge and evil, evil is not present, so you don't need to perceive it. Now the tree was there. It was present in the tree, but they hadn't yet partaken of it. They hadn't picked the fruit, decided to pick the fruit and eat it, knowing full well that God said, "You will surely die if you partake of this tree." But the devil, the serpent, as he's described in the Garden of Eden, beguiled them. He gave them partial knowledge, and he gave them partial facts. And partial facts is ignorance. If you have partial facts, you are ignorant of the remaining excluded facts, which give you the full picture. So partial knowledge is ignorance. So the devil knew and identified the potential where Adam and Eve's ignorance would lie, and avoided that area, and only presented what he felt would stack up in the way of tempting them towards partaking of that fruit. The devil doesn't say too much. He only says the amount that's going to lead you to the temptation. So he says just enough to tempt you, and, there's sort of an I told you so, but at the same time doesn't give you the full picture. Because he said, you shall not surely die. That was the lie. God said, you shall surely die. The devil said, you shall not surely die, but you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So what he was saying was, it's not like death. It's not like, the end of you kaput, you're completely no consciousness. But God was saying that you will die in effect. You will be, cut off from me. And I am life. You'll be cut off from the tree of life, from eternity, if you partake of that tree. And in some parts of what Satan said, there was fact. You will become like God in that you will know good and evil. God knows good and evil, but the difference is that God is not tempted by evil, whereas men would be. So there would be a susceptibility in man that isn't present in God. And every man, excluding none, that have been born into the earth, have had that predisposition apart from Christ himself. So that sovereignty, that deity, that godship of Christ, of Jesus Christ the carpenter, was evident in that he was not susceptible to the temptations, whereas man has always been susceptible to the temptation. If we weren't susceptible to temptation, Adam and Eve never would have partaken of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because they wouldn't have been beguiled. They wouldn't have disobeyed. So the potential to be misled and tempted has always been there. Because there are frailties in the condition of man that aren't present in God. Because God is pure, undefiled, almighty, all-knowing, and nobody else is like him. So those predispositions, those susceptibilities, proclivities, inclinations, whatever you want to call them, towards doing evil, have always been in man. But the knowledge of good and evil made man's consciousness focus on the harmful, whereas before that it didn't. That's why, and these are not oversimplified metaphors, these are actual events that took place. That's why Adam and Eve placed the clothing over their genitalia and tried to conceal their bodies after they partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because they became aware that the other might have evil intentions toward them, and things like shame entered in and the desire then to conceal. And there's no peace in that. It's sort of, immediately they were looking over their shoulders, and because there's no peace, there's no security in that, with beady eyes that are hungering after flesh, and your consciousness that they're there. They're discarding your own personal worth of soul and of person, but they're hungering after your flesh merely for how you look and how you will make them feel, and they'll satisfy their bellies of their fallen nature, discarding your own safety. And so there's a consciousness to cover up and to conceal. Just hungry beasts like demons. So that beastliness of man, we've fought with it and warred against it for millennia, for thousands of years, and we've tried to manage it. And it has shown its ugly face time and time again. It's reared its ugly face. The devil only looks for an opportunity to stoke those fires, because he's hunting mankind. And when angels who hungered after human flesh took wives of human women, they created giants, hybrids, which are now the ghosts in the earth. They're the demons in the earth, the disembodied giants. And they're demigods over this present darkness, cosmic powers, and they seek to destroy mankind. Do you see? So that's what they're doing, but they're tempting and expressing death. They're just making it harder for man to resist the temptation. But God will make sure that it's not too hard. So, because there has to be a separation, and why should it take longer? So, because God suffers us. He suffers his creatures harming each other and wanting to consume each other's flesh and treat each other like meat, and not loving each other, but lovelessly satisfying their sexual urges, which are debauched and depraved. And many urges besides. Addictions and sorceries and all sorts of things. Greed for money and wealth, and to make the enemy destitute, and glorifying another's suffering, and all that kind of stuff is against God's nature, and he won't sustain it indefinitely. So why should he prolong his own suffering when people will decide to go away from him? So that's why hell exists. Hell was created for those who rebelled against God, which would be their final place of incarceration and immurity in suffering for eternity, because they've chosen death. And that's what death is. It's destitution and destruction. So God is saying, I sent my son to die for your crimes, so that you can be reconciled back to me. And Jesus chose to lay his life down for we, his brethren, his eternal brethren, so that we can be reconciled back to him, and we don't have to be eternally separated or destroyed in hell at all. We can be in the Lord Jesus Christ forever and ever. Amen. So if now you're better informed as to why there needs to be good news, like somebody will say, "Why? What's the bad news?" You say, "I have some good news for you." "Why? What's the bad news?" Like if you were living in perfect bliss, somebody says, "I have some good news," you say, "It's all good news." Why do you tell me you have good news? I only have good news. There's no bad news to contrast good news. What do you mean? So, good news is only good news if there's bad news present, which requires the good news to alleviate it or to remove it. So the good news is that you can be saved from hellfire, from destruction, from death, even today, even right now, this moment. That's the good news. Salvation in Jesus Christ the righteous. Now, how do you attain this? It's not by your strength, it's not by your wit. It's by submission, by confession of faith in Jesus Christ. Not the confession that the Catholic Church taught you. It's this, oh, so sorry, Father, it's been so long since I did, and I pulled my sister's hair and I gave her a noogie and broke her Barbie in half. That's rubbish. The Bible says, yes, it does say, confess one to another and forgive one to another. It doesn't say go into a box and tell a tattletale on yourself to the priest. Catholicism is not Christianity. Let's just get that out there. Because it doesn't obey the Bible. It doesn't obey the scriptures. It doesn't. It's not Christian. Why? Christian means follower of Christ and Christ-like. So if you're following somebody, you obey them, or you're not following them. Yeah, I'll follow you up the road there, just to annoy the head off you and do nothing you tell me to do. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, what did you say? Mind the puddle? Okay, splish. You know what I mean? That's not following somebody, that's pursuing them. So demons will pursue you all day long just to annoy the head off you. Hexes and vexes, and they love it. They're like little sort of light bulbs that only spark up whenever they're annoying somebody. So, following Jesus, or Christian, Christ-like, means to obey him, and that's what the Bible says we have on the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ. Meaning that we have the will, the desire, the urge to fulfill his will and to be as he is. Not to be as the world is, not to submit to the fleshly urges that say, go and sleep with that man's wife. Not those basal, reptilious, animalistic, careless, reckless urges that would see us all destitute in our own mess. But to actually conform to that which is holy so that you can have pleasure, and not just to a small degree, but to a great degree, and not just for a short time, but forever. You see, good pleasure brings more good pleasure. I'll give you an example. You marry a woman, you make a house, you bring a child into that house, they have a family. You sleep with some other man's wife, she gets pregnant, she tells him it's not his baby, that house breaks apart, their children suffer, the child that was born out of wedlock suffers, the marriage breaks down, they go their separate ways, everybody loses. So there are good paths, wise paths for your feet, and there are unwise paths for your feet. And you should want the wise paths for your feet, because unwise paths bring destruction for everybody. And evil men have a way of hiding their crime and their guilt, but it'll catch up with them. But they're submitted to the flesh, not to Christ. They're submitted to that tree of evil, of the knowledge of good and evil. They submitted to it. They've consumed the fruit and they now are ruled by that. And they fashion all of their wit, every smart they have, every intelligence they have, every gift they have, to furnishing the flesh with its urges, but hiding and concealing the evil nature of those urges and the harmful effects of them as much as they can, trying to rationalize them and reason them before the beholding eye. So that evil men, to walk around with their head held high in society, have to teach everybody else that evil is good. Sure, what's wrong with having a mix of family? And sure, aren't we all the one lump of clay anyway? Sure, as long as you're happy. As long as you're happy. Why do they have to split up because she made one mistake? You know, you can rationalise these things. And it would be good for the man to forgive her and keep her and take that child into his house if the other man... But that other man might want his child. And so now there's a discord. The woman wants to keep the child, the man wants his child, there's a fight. It's just not... You know, if everybody was on the same page, but they're not. And it would still only be trying to cover over a mistake. So, what if you didn't view it as a mistake in the first place? Oh yeah, sure, why don't you go back and live over there with the wolves in the forest? It doesn't work. You have to have some kind of family structure. You have to have morality, and that's where and why and how the common good exists. Because if you didn't conform to good morality, you could not have the common good. The common good could not exist without good morality and conforming to that good morality. So good morality is the bedrock of good for all, of well-functioning systems within society, so that we can have culture and we can have unity and we can have craft and we can have all the things that enrich the soul. But also the good familial structures which sustain and maintain the common good and lay that foundation for everybody to prosper. The building of infrastructure, the building of houses and farms and self-sufficiency, and not this over abundance of things which are unnecessary and frivolous and overly luxurious and to a fault. There's no need for those things to be centralised and built in a factory, thousands of miles away, because you don't build your own country's structure. And I'm not talking about flags and divisions and border lines and nations and continents and armies. I'm just talking about any specific area. For an area to prosper, it should be relying on nature within that area. I mean, if the Eskimos can do it, what's anybody else's excuse? So when you sort of contract your work out to somebody else, you bring poverty on your own household, but not in the form of lacking stuff, but lacking control and quality of stuff. So I've heard somebody say it like, people want speed and convenience for the sake of, or for the loss of, sovereignty. But they don't just lose sovereignty, they lose quality, and the quality of the craft sustaining the life and the livelihood of the nation and its independence. And that's what you lose by that. And that goes out the window with good morality. It goes out the window with, proper societal infrastructure when you neglect to ingrain and integrate good morality into the very fabric of the ordering of society and its conduct. You lose all of those things. You lose reliance on the land you're from. Sure, how are you Irish? If you're not relying on Ireland for everything you need, how are you Irish? If Ireland doesn't provide the very staple of your existence, the very base and fundamental and rudimentary sustenance of your household, how are you Irish? An Eskimo is an Eskimo and can call himself an Eskimo. from his land because he lives on his land. He absolutely takes his life and sustains it from his land. But how are you Irish if you're buying your potatoes from Spain? How are you Irish if you're not supporting the Irish farmer? He has to shut down because you're buying stuff that's bought and produced elsewhere. How are you Irish? Like the Flat Kill we had in Wexford there over the week, it was beautiful atmosphere, real festival atmosphere, but not sort of drunk and bouncing around, people puking, tents and muck, but a real sort of a laid back, just people busking on the street, nothing too rowdy, nothing unsightly or unseemly or obscene. The police or the guards were very quick to remove anybody that got too tipsy and started getting messy. And the whole thing was kept very sort of subdued, and so that everybody could enjoy the day. It was more of a family atmosphere. So they did well at keeping it that way. And the culture was celebrated, and this is good. But it would be bad if it was only there to conceal some corruption, wouldn't it? Like, take their mind off the corruption here, we'll give them an Irish day out or something, you know what I mean? Like, there is so much corruption in our country now that it's just gotten rotten. And Michael D. Higgins, the president, and his government are claiming that there's legislation in place that says they're not accountable to the courts of Ireland if they're found in misconduct in their office. Sure, whose president is Michael D. Higgins if he's not answerable to Irish people and the court, the arm of justice? What is he, God? Higher than God? But even Jesus Christ submitted to the Father. Jesus learned obedience by suffering. Who is Michael D. Higgins that he's not held accountable to anybody? If Michael D. Higgins is found in misconduct, it doesn't matter that he's the president, it doesn't matter that he's custodian of the Constitution, it doesn't matter that he's supreme head of the Defence Forces as President of Ireland in our parliamentary democracy, he's still accountable as an Irishman to the law. And is he the only one in government who's not held accountable for misconduct? It wouldn't make sense, would it, that the man whose very position is to maintain, uphold, implement and enforce both the Constitution and the law, who's given the duty of signing bills into law once he's checked them for their constitutionality, if he's not held accountable to the courts of Ireland for misconduct or when in misconduct, what is the point of having him in that position as a sort of a military position for defence of the Constitution of Ireland and the implementation of the laws as they're written? If he's not held accountable, or anybody like him, any president after him, is not held accountable to the Constitution of Ireland by way of the courts of Ireland, which are the arm of justice when it comes to the Constitution. It wouldn't be fitting. It doesn't befit a president that he won't submit to the powers he claims to wield and enforce. That's absolutely outlandish, that a president wouldn't submit to the laws of Ireland and by submitting to the courts. And the government conspire to lie to the Irish people and write legislations which the Irish people did not okay. That state, the President of Ireland doesn't have to check the constitutionality of bills prior to their enactment. Of course he does. If the President of Ireland doesn't have to enforce the Constitution and the law, then one might say, well, it's not his position to make sure that things are in line with the Constitution and in line with the law. But that's his very role. That's what the custodian of the Constitution is. His very role is to make sure that bills are constitutional prior to signing them in. Why? Because you can't protect the Constitution and sign things in that fight against it. That's what custodian is, caretaker, protector. So the man who is protector of the Constitution is claiming least responsibility, or accountability rather, when he's in a position that holds most responsibility for the preservation of the Constitution when it comes to signing bills in as law. It's just incomprehensible and reprehensible conduct. It's inexcusable. It should infuriate the peoples. Because people are so numb to it at this stage, the level of corruption in this country. And I'm for Ireland. I like Irish culture. I like the land, I like the country, I like this sort of relaxed and upbeat sort of welcoming nature of the Irish man that he's known for. But there is a systemic evil in this land that doesn't sit well with me. And it shouldn't you either. But you see, there's such an authoritarian history in Ireland that people have just been so browbeaten, so beaten down for so long by this parochial, parish, Catholic priest authority. You know, don't question the learned, don't question the man who's gone through the seminary, don't question. And what was he doing all the while? Raping the children. Paedophiles left, right and centre in the Catholic Church. And these men were in cohorts with the government. It was a church state. And they were not a Christian church, because Christians don't rape children or beat them to a pulp or beat them so hard that they die and they might have to bury them somewhere and try to conceal it. And God knows what else they did. Atrocities, because it was so heavily demonized. So, you know, Michael Z. Higgins and anybody else who's a Freemason in government, they shouldn't be there. Freemasons shouldn't be anywhere near government or the guards or anywhere in society, because they are a satanic organisation. But what they've done over the centuries is they've involved themselves very heavily in charitable organisations to try to front and conceal and present a facade over their organisation and over their brotherhood, to get more access to the strings in government and start pulling them in the way of immorality. And that's why you have same-sex marriage and abortion, killing and butchering babies in the womb, like. And people were groomed and desensitized to accept that and vote for it. And we can only assume that the votes were collected fairly and rightly. Counted properly. So, because they're not doing other administrative procedures, well, why would we assume they do that right? The very president is saying, I don't have to check bills for their constitutionality prior to signing them into as law. What? And if I'm found in misconduct in my seat, I'm not answerable to your courts. What? What are you doing then? Whose president are you? Supposed to be taking care of the Constitution of Ireland and enforcing it in the law and making sure nothing's in the law that fights the Constitution, because then it would be unconstitutional and the President has to prevent it getting in there, because then harmful things will come by way of its addition to the legislature. So that's his job there. If somebody presents a bill on his desk and he's supposed to check it there for its constitutionality. If it fights the Constitution, he's supposed to remove it and make sure that it doesn't get added as law, because then there'll be a discrepancy and a disagreement in the law and the Constitution and between them. And the law can never contradict the Constitution in this country. And that's the job of Michael D. Higgins to make sure. And he's saying I don't have to, because there's a legislation that says you don't have to. Can you imagine writing a legislation that says the very making of legislation has been altered? I mean, how do you put that first legislation into place that says you can alter all the rest of the procedures that prevent against unconstitutional legislation? You can't. There could never be that first legislation that makes way for all the corrupt legislations. Why? Because it would be corrupt. So obviously the legislation that says Michael D. Higgins doesn't have to check bills for their constitutionality is unconstitutional. So it can't be regarded as lawful. And Michael D. Higgins better not be regarding it as lawful, because we have the Treason Act for that. But if it's his job as custodian of the Constitution to make sure nothing is in the writings that fights the Constitution, no such legislation should remain while he's in office. He should hunt that out a long time ago and removed it. But he's sitting on it and acting on it, not removing it, which shows he conspired with it, which shows he's committed treason and sedition. That is my belief, and I can prove it. I just have in this video. Imagine a president who won't submit to the course of the land he swears to serve. But that's what we're facing now. And the hypocrisy of the man then to come down to Wexford and open the Fleadh Festival, as though he cared about Ireland and its culture and its constitution and its common good. The hypocrisy of him. But that's the sort of hypocrisy now that's systemic in our land. We don't have to tolerate it. And we certainly don't have to shake hands with it. Because it's the devil. It's nothing short of Satan. And as men, we're supposed to protect the little ones from the devil. Because he would throw them in fires to Molech. He doesn't care about your children. He's only the Pied Pooper. You know the Pied Piper? Well, he's the Pied Pooper. Around he goes, laying the dirt all around the place for people to step in. Laying the traps for people, him and his demons. And we have to clean the place up after his parade. But you can't do that if you're going to sit on your hands. You can't do that if you're not going to open your mouth and expose it for fear of upsetting the apple cart or making life difficult for yourself. As they say, you don't make life difficult for yourself by telling the truth. Others make it difficult for you because they are being exposed. And they're retaliating, even though they're not justified to do so. That's their behaviour. Because cornered dogs lunge at you. Cornered rats jump at your face. They certainly do not engage in logical or reasonable discussion. They dismiss, scoff, laugh, mock, and lunge. And they lunge at you when others aren't looking, so that they can try and keep their bib clean. Or they send somebody else to persecute you. so that they have the appearance of impunity and blamelessness and clean hands. So, absolutely, Michael D. Higgins is answerable to the courts of Ireland like every other Irish man. But the courts are answerable to the Constitution, or they haven't established the warrant, or validated it, ratified it, or jurisdiction either. So they're a rogue court, not submitting to the laws. They're a pirate court. And they've committed treason in our land. Now, to take it a step further, they're now telling us that once Michael D. Higgins has failed to do his job and something ends up in the law, or it's being pretended as law whilst it fights the Constitution and other laws, the courts are now saying we must presume it's constitutional in the absence of a test, even though we brought it to the High Court to be tested and to the Court of Appeal to be tested. They're saying that we should continue to presume it constitutional when they failed to test it twice in 2 scheduled court cases which were carried out. They just abandoned the test mid-case, gave no reason for doing so. So that's the level of aggressive refusal to carry out their task for the prevention of the corruption of our Constitution and laws. They won't do it. They're refusing point blank to do it. Without refusing. Don't refuse, just don't do it. You know? Because if you refuse, they say, you can't refuse us. They try to not do something but remove the ability for backlash and discussion on the matter. It's not up for discussion. Oh, it absolutely is. We pay your wages. You are the ones who are supposed to implement our laws and uphold our Constitution. We pay you to do that job. We give you the Constitution and we pay you to uphold it. And you promise to. Article 25 of the Constitution, the President's oath. He promises to ensure that the Constitution is upheld and the laws are upheld. He's taking us for fools. Just taking us for fools, like. And Irish people aren't stupid. We're not fools. See, they bank on the fact that they're talking over most people's heads. And most people aren't even aware what's going on. And that's why it's so important that guys who do know come out and tell you. It's protection. We're protecting your country and your children and your family and your legacy and your lineage and your nation. We're trying to lead your feet to right paths that won't harm your children. And leave them an inheritance that will be their destruction. That's why we work so hard to bring you the truth and are willing to suffer so much for doing so, because corrupt men they just don't care about you or a million of you. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? It's psychopathic. I know it's sociopathic, but that's who they are. That's what Freemasonry does to people. Because it's collaboration with Satan and his demons. That's why our ancestors said they can't be in our governments, they can't be in our police, because they knew that it would be hugely detrimental to the nation if they get into power. And look what they've done. They don't care. They don't even bother now to try and make sense of what they're doing before the people. That's how corrupt it is. And so these are all the reasons why the good news is needed. We need a way out of this corrupt world, We need a way to everlasting life. We've had thousands of years to prove that we can't do this thing on our own. That despite man's best efforts to clean himself up, he's dirty. Prisons are still open because men are still committing crimes. And men are still dying. The morgues haven't gone out of business. The mortuaries and the cemeteries are filling up. Man is destined for destruction without some good news. And we have the good news. But we don't neglect to expose the corruption just because we've found the solution. Because once you become like Christ, you'll want to expose the corruption. You'll want to preserve your fellow man and to remove the corruption for their sakes. It'll just be your new urge. It'll be your new drive. You'll be as committed to it as you were to sinning. Because now you have a new spiritual head, a new spiritual master, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ the righteous. And it's as simple as that. So yes, absolutely have culture. And have nation and have constitution and have value in your work and in your nation as a whole and your community. Absolutely. But we can't just focus on the trim. You know what I mean? Like the instrumentation and the trim, and forget the morality and the institutional fabrics which need to be maintained to ensure that we can continue to have good working systems within the home and the economy to support the home. And so we need to have infrastructure. The fact that we're still talking about this years on, that there's a lack of houses, is just inexplicably corrupt. When they can put on an excellent festival in Wexford in a matter of weeks of preparation. Now I know they've been preparing for years, like bits and bobs and stuff, but to actually come and do the deed and when they want to do something, they can do it. Why does it take a festival for them to clean up their act? This is the point I'm making. And sometimes you need like an event to really make you aware of what you can do together. It can be a real sort of a team building event. And relationships and contacts are made, and this is good. Like, think of all the volunteers who worked together on the festival who wouldn't have had that opportunity. Now they're coming together, they know each other, they've touched base with each other, they've relationships, they've networked together, and who knows what else they could achieve together by working together. And but before that event, there was nothing. So this is the point I'm making. If you take all of that sort of energy for festivity and put it into culture holistically throughout all of society, like farming and housing and all of that, and you take that unity and that togetherness, you can build a nation. But what you have to do is you have to make sure that the corrupt men in government are not standing in your way and lying to you and delaying stuff and neglecting to do their job when you'd probably do a better job yourself. These men are not qualified. And they're telling you, you can't bring me before your courts. How dare they? How dare the President of Ireland say, I don't submit to your courts. You can't hold me accountable for misconduct. I don't have to check the constitutionality of bills, even though I swore an oath to implement and uphold and enforce the Constitution and the law. It's incomprehensible and reprehensible behaviour. It's unconscionable. There's no excuse for it. It defies conscience and every well-meaning knowledge of true path and well-functioning system. It's just inexcusable from a president to have such a position and a stance. It's not acceptable. So we can't do this and throw away the key just to keep the peace, because you're actually fighting against it then. It's interesting, like I'll be down the bull ring talking on similar issues or preaching the gospel, and somebody will come along, will you just be quiet, give me some peace and quiet? And you kind of ask, does your peace require quiet? Because if your peace requires quiet, it's not true peace. Like, the festival here for the week wasn't quiet, was it? It certainly wasn't quiet. But there was peace. There was a relaxed atmosphere. You see what I'm saying? So peace, it's not that I'm saying something, it's what I'm saying that is disrupting a spiritual presence that is agitating the people and making them feel uneasy. It's not the fact that I'm talking, because if I was talking about match of the day, people would have no issue. It's what I'm talking about that's disrupting the spiritual controllers, the spiritual overlords who are keeping our nation in levels of sleep for its destruction. And I won't stand by and watch it and be quiet. So don't expect me to. I care too much about our nation, about humanity, to stay quiet. So don't expect it of me. They had a civil order against me for 2 years here. I wasn't allowed to speak under threat of imprisonment. The High Court ruled that that civil order was unlawful, that the injustice had been perpetrated by the state against me, and they'd motioned not to compensate me for such an injustice. I was imprisoned for a month. They said that was an injustice perpetrated against me, and they gave me no compensation, the big zero, for a month imprisonment. That's the level of corruption within the society. But the same freedoms of expression, the same freedoms of speech afforded us the opportunity as a nation to enjoy the Flackhole this past week. Do you see the point? We can't accept corrupt presidents. I don't care how patriotic they pretend to be, or how much they pretend to support Irish culture. If you're not supporting Irish constitution, you don't support the Irish people. If you're not doing your job as custodian of the constitution, if you're not checking bills for their constitutionality, if you're electing that there's a legislation in existence that says you don't have to do the very job that you swore or promised to do, then you're not caring for Ireland or Irish people or Irish culture, no matter how you pretend you are. If you're not submitting to the very laws of the land your job it is to enforce, something's not right. Because you cannot wield the power you do not submit to. Jesus Christ himself submitted to the Father. He said, "Not my will be done, but your will be done." But Michael D. Higgins doesn't submit to the Constitution of Ireland when he's custodian of it. That's treason. That's sedition. Very, very high crime. And I, for one, will not remain quiet on the issue. It's because I value you. It's because I love you. It's because I love Irish culture. Dance and song and the lightness of touch and the subtlety of nuance within the arts, the Irish arts, whether it be by speech or by dance or by painting or by music, by poetry or otherwise. These freedoms of expression are what give us our Irishness and our ability to express it. So just because you don't like what I'm saying, men of ages past would have said, "I don't have to agree with what you say, but I will fight for your right to say it." Where has that gone? Where has that value of freedom of expression gone? And why are men who are most responsible in government refusing to and failing to implement the Constitution and the law and uphold those freedoms? I would never have been in prison for a month if they were implementing and upholding those freedoms. I would have never been told I couldn't speak for 2 years in this town if those freedoms were being preserved for all. It's when we're exposing the corruption of the corrupt men within our government that they start slapping hard down on us through the local municipalities. Wexford has a heritage of defending this country, and I just hope that they'll step up to the mark and continue to defend this country. And not necessarily by the pike, but by the pen and the mic. We need to reinstate people in government who value our Constitution, who will uphold our laws, who will implement the freedoms of expression to all, accepting obscenity. Ireland already has laws that govern freedom of speech, but they are to prevent obscenity, inappropriate matter being spoken about in public. And that's very specific. Obscenity is like lewdness, overtly sexual material and things of that nature. And we still have those laws. Now, you can describe certain aspects of sexuality or gender without becoming obscene or lewd or inordinately or overtly sexual, inappropriately sexual. So like nude imagery and overly sexualised attire even on a person is not allowed in Ireland. It's obscene. Or perverted stuff that we don't need to go into. Behaviour, conduct in public place. Unacceptable. So, now they're corralling children to go and see the transvestite show that would normally be in the George down the local park. It's just getting out of hand. The same transvestites putting on the show in George's Street up in Dublin there for a promiscuous gathering are now putting on a show down the local park for the children, impressionable children, and the pride in the park. Pride comes before a fall. What has happened to the teaching of wisdom in our nation? So before God I speak, and I won't be quieted, but by the cutting out of my tongue. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I'm in God's hands in that respect. So I will, for your children, who I love dearly, and you, continue to expose the corruption which would bury you and every value you have, and enslave you to big corporate conglomerate businesses which seek to enslave your nation under the facade of ample provision, when they're not even bothering to build you enough houses and give you enough farms so that you can sustain yourself. It only takes a week of a festival here for Aldi to run out of water. They can't have the ability to restock very quickly if that's the case. So Ireland need to be putting things into practice which makes us have the ability to self-sustain in the basics of living, like the Eskimo does. The Eskimo can say that he is truly of his nation, but the Irishman's buying potatoes from Spain. Whilst the guy who's actually growing the chemical-free stuff, the best stuff there in Donegal, is struggling, having to ask people, nearly begging them to buy his stuff. It's disgusting. And why? Because the government aren't giving the Irishman gainful employment so that they can enslave him. It says under the family in the Irish Constitution, The government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that a woman leaves the house and goes to work. That says you have to pay the man enough to sustain his family and his wife as a mother at home. And if you're not doing that, how can you expect him to be able to buy the potatoes off the Irish farmer when he's stuck in the clearance aisle getting the spuds that are about to expire, the roots growing out of them? It's disgusting. And the government have to stop lying to us and trying to distract us with cultural events while they're raping this country of its ability to sustain itself. I'm all for culture. I was down in the thick of the Fleadh, loving the music and watching the people enjoying themselves and really feeding off that. It's food for the soul. But we cannot be distracted from what we have to do to make sure that those freedoms can continue, while Irish people are able to sustain themselves. Blessings in Jesus' name. I love you. Say it and believe it today. Jesus is risen, Lord, and you can be rescued from hellfire.